Hello, everyone. I'm Captain Logan, and it's not Spawn year. It's day 78 of my comic review video day calendar. Today, I'm going to do another older Batman comic that comes out in the late 60s. And as I have so often done this year, I picked a cover based on it looking like our main characters might die. Not that I'm ever actually expecting that to happen, of course, outside of Superman 75. It's just an aesthetic that I like and a situation that is fun to read about and see all the various ways that characters are either killed and immediately brought back or teased or we're teased to think that that's going to happen and it doesn't. And this is one of the most anticlimactic and disappointing versions of that I've ever looked at because it is just the cover and really is not inside the book whatsoever. So picked this one based exclusively on what it looks like, and this just being another older book that looks really great in my collection. This is Batman number 202, which comes out in 1968, and the credits. The credited writer and artist are not here, so I had to look elsewhere on DC Fandom to find this out because they're not listed in the book. But this one is written by Gardner Fox, who we've talked about before already this year. He co-created the Justice Society and the Justice League of America and was really super important for DC. He passes away in 1986, and this is drawn by Chick Stone, which is a name that I'm familiar with but couldn't immediately remember things that he had worked on. He is known mostly for Marvel work with early Fantastic Four and X-Men as an inker, but he was apparently a ghost artist for Bob Kane and George Papp on Batman, Superboy, and other things. So he had a history with Batman, and I really like his art in this quite a bit. Like I said, this is a great-looking book in my collection. It's in really wonderful shape. It's got great colors. The cover has not faded very much. The interiors look great. It looks like no spine damage whatsoever. I don't know how this would grade. It's probably at least a very good, if not a little better. Is it possible I've got a fine book from 1968? Maybe. It's more likely to still just be a very good, but the corners look really good. There's barely a ding anywhere. So this is another one of those things that I just wanted to show you as an artifact, if nothing else. And honestly, I'm not going to have a great deal to say about the story here because it's routine and unmemorable, but I'm going to tell you what happens anyway because, I select these things before I read them if I've never read them before. I read this in digital again because I didn't want to risk opening this and damaging it in any way, but it's a really neat cover, one of my favorites, I think, and another one of those books that I bought a few years ago from a guy selling his dad's private collection. I mentioned that I got a lot of detectives that day at $10 a pop, and there were a few Batmans that I ended up getting from that same period as well, so late 60s, early 70s stuff. So let me go ahead and get into this for what it's worth. This is just a 13-page story, and then there's a Robin backup feature that will take approximately 35 seconds to review. So, but I'm sure I'll find some reason to take longer. So the situation here is that somebody is robbing banks and a diamond company at the beginning here with what seems to be telekinesis. But apparently, Chick Stone is not familiar with that word, or few enough people in 1968 are using it that Batman feels the need to keep referring to the supposed power as mind over matter ability, and that's what everybody calls it. And later on we'll find out that there's a magician that calls himself a mind over matter artist, so that's the ability here. We will never find out exactly how this is being done, but there's, at first I'm thinking it's invisibility, and there's this mystery that's developed around this where Batman's trying to figure out how on earth somebody is going around making objects seem to float and making bricks crash into into windows and just wreaking havoc with what seems to be a telekinesis. And we're told there's all these details where we're able to rule out invisibility and other things. And then Batman explains this to Alfred, and he seems very familiar with this ability or with the situation, what's happening, and it makes him faint. He has There's a lot of weird word choice in this issue, by the way. A brain bomb goes off, we're told, like a mental bomb, and so it's not exactly fainting, but that's effectively what happens. But he just can't process information. This information can't handle it, and at first, I'm giving the book enough credit to think that there's more going on here. Maybe it's some sort of hypnosis or something. Nope, it will just turn out that he is an elderly, somewhat geriatric man who can't handle too much, excitement at once. It's that kind of typical I, elderly guy situation where, oh no, I'm this is all too much for me, and so he just falls apart and passes out. Okay, and as he is delirious, he mentions the name of a cemetery, and at first Robin doesn't know what he's talking about. He starts babbling, and he says Eternal Gate. And Robin's like, what in the world is Eternal Gate? That sounds really ominous. And this is very much a 60s Batman sort of story, but told, of course, with more gravitas, a little bit spookier, and it's not as much fun. We've talked about these kinds of stories before, but it's very much like an episode of that show in that Batman is familiar with the place in Gotham that connects to this cryptic phrase or word that's brought up. Eternal Gate. And Batman goes, there's only one possible answer. It must be the Eternal Gate Cemetery. So they go to this real spooky cemetery that has it looks like most television cemeteries, a dry ice machine, even though it's in a comic book. And there is a statue of a cherubim that flies at Batman's head, knocks him out for a second, and they follow these footprints into a mausoleum. And there's a terrible trio waiting for them in the mausoleum, and objects. Well, you expect objects to start flying at them again if it was actually telekinesis, but it really isn't. So Batman and Robin are, just like in the 60s show, they're prepared for anything, so they have put they have put earplugs in their ears because there's evidence earlier that a loud sound, that high-pitched whine that mostly only dogs can hear has been happening, and someone nearby is doing that, and it turns out that, I don't know why these people have superpowers or what seem like superpowers, but there's this weird, creepy-looking guy that can do that to them, and then Robin says, oh, well, if we're gonna do that, I don't know how he gets ahead of this, but it's just easy. They're Boy Scouts. Well, if that could happen, we might as well also put plugs in our noses in case there's gas. And I'm thinking, well, why not go even farther than that? Why not put on some kind of flotation device in case the mausoleum fills up with water? Or why not put rocket packs on your back in case you have to fly up into the sky because there's fire everywhere? Anything could happen. But it turns out that there really is gas, and Robin was right about this. So we fight these guys for a while, and then there's gas, and despite the nose plugs, Batman and Robin accidentally sniff some of it, and so they end up going in slow motion, and which is hilarious. And this also would make for, honestly, a really amusing death trap in a 60s Batman episode. So they're fighting these guys, and they're moving slower than their opponents are, but ultimately they manage to succeed, of course. I'm trying to remember exactly how. They just use their bat ropes and they manage to knock these guys over, even though they're moving at a different rate. And then they go back to talk to Alfred, and Alfred gives us an explanation that is not much of an explanation at all. And we only have like two-thirds, like half or two-thirds of a page left. That's just Alfred saying, well, there was this guy, we're calling him now the psychic plunderer. I'm so surprised that never caught on. And he was a soldier along with Alfred during World War II, and he saved Alfred's life from a bomb explosion. So I guess there's supposed to be like a parallel with like the brain bomb thing and like an actual real bomb. Maybe that's the idea here. I don't know. Oh, I also should mention that Masked Manhunters came back again. I brought that up with, I can't remember if it was the detective issue I did at the beginning of Batmarch or if it was a Brave and the Bold issue. I think it was that detective issue that just could not stop saying Masked Manhunters. Apparently that was popular around this time because this doesn't bring it up a bunch, but it comes in again. So it seems like it was way up there with Caped Crusaders as a nickname for Batman and Robin, Masked Manhunters. But anyway, so Alfred gives us this non-explanation where this guy saves him during World War II, and that's why he had a hard time explaining to Batman what was going on. I guess maybe like something his conscience gets to him, and that guy ends up becoming like a magician. And Alfred says, I always thought that there must have been some sort of trick to it, you know, the way he's able to make things move through the air. That's all we know. The guy's name is Norman, and he can make things look like they're moving through the air, but we never know how he actually does it. So it's this mystery that, you know, sort of like an X-Files episode where you never really understand how exactly the supernatural thing is happening, except it's not at all, it's not really effective. You don't feel, any kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, of relief at the end of this. You're just like, oh, okay, so what about that? I mean, I guess I'm glad we stopped these guys, but like, did he really have this ability? Or I don't really understand what the point of this is. It's not very satisfying. It's just, let's make the reader keep turning pages wondering how this is possible in a world where I would expect magic occasionally can happen, but this is playing this is trying to play it a little bit more realistic, where, oh, there's no way it's telekinesis. That would be crazy. So it has to be something else. And then we get to the end, and we don't even talk about it like it's ambiguous about it. We just act like we were given an explanation, but we weren't. It's a very strange story. I wasn't real impressed with it. And then I'll just mention again real briefly, there's this backup feature where Robin fights this gang on motorcycles that want to get revenge on their high school, I guess, because one of them got thrown out for being a delinquent because, like, look, they're delinquents. And so Robin is supposed to, he's running for class president. And so Batman decides to go on patrol by himself. And Robin or Dick Grayson gets on his motorcycle, and or is he just taking a car? What is he even doing? Yeah, I don't know. Has he even? No, he hasn't even left yet. He hasn't even gone anywhere. Bruce Wayne leaves, and then I guess this happens just right outside of Wayne Manor, maybe? I don't know what's happening. Anyway, so Robin, or are we at the school right now? I'm not sure. Anyway, Robin ends up being able to suit up because get this, he has his suit disguised in a tie that he says, pretty neat idea of mine, disguising a collapsible costume as a tie. That's the only explanation we're given. It's collapsible. It's sort of like Flash's outfit in a ring. Like, it's collapsible. He can just undo it, and now he's got his costume on. So he fights this biker gang, and he ends up disguising himself as one of them in order to bring this gang down. And the panel layouts here are really neat, by the way. I love the kind of flip to the side panels. Haven't seen that a whole lot, and that's really ambitious for this period. Like, they're not even flat. There's this sort of like foreshortening technique, and we're punching a guy right out of a panel. This whole thing is really cool looking. It's not a great story, but it's really dynamic looking, and it really jumps out at you. It's kind of eye catching. Some nice kind of moody, evening atmosphere here with the moon in the back, or the huge moon in the background, and all of that. But the funniest thing about this is the last page, where Dick Grayson totally misses his speech, and he's not going to be able to win class president. And then he goes and talks to Bruce, and Bruce says, come on, it isn't all that bad. After all, our work demands sacrifices. Get some sleep. It'll be all right in the morning. And, like, that's not very comforting, Bruce. He basically just says, well, the crime fighting thing is important, and you'll get over it. And Dick has a single tear, and he says, sure, Bruce, I'll be okay. And it's supposed to be about the difficulty in managing your superhero life and your regular life, and it's kind of sad, and I think it's maybe a little sadder than it's supposed to be, and I think Bruce comes off as kind of a jerk face. But anyway, so kind of an amusing, just little 8-page story in the back here. But lastly, and I haven't done this at all yet in Not Spawn Year, and I thought maybe occasionally we would tackle some letters pages. I want to just read this one to you. I'm not going to comment too much on it, but it's not like most of you guys will have taken a look at this issue, so I'm sure nobody has actually heard this letter, and it's a really interesting one because it's interesting because of the person who writes it. Not that it's anybody that we know. It's just somebody reading comics. But the perspective is interesting, and the way this person is apologizing for comics as a medium in 1968, when it's considered kind of kiddie fare and not really for adults, and people kind of look down at you for being a nerd reading comics, is really interesting. So let me read this to you real quick, and then I will bid you farewell for today. So this says, Dear Editor, I have been reading and purchasing, of course, your magazines for some time, and now I feel it is time to confess something that may be on many readers' minds. Kind of the elephant in the room. I do not know one human being that confesses to reading comics. I may not know the right people, but when I mentioned enjoying Batman comics to my fellow students at college, they either laughed or gave me a weird look. I am writing this letter to defend myself and others who were ashamed about reading Batman. After thoroughly enjoying the February number 199 issue of Batman, I felt a certain sensation which I must attribute to your publication. First, I must say I was thrilled at having a 3-story issue, and each story was very enjoyable. I do want to get away from my main point, which is that we live, maybe meant I do not want to get away from my main point, which is that we live in a very horrid world. This is not a new statement, but I feel that many people wish they could, quote, do something about it. What can we do? Join groups? Okay. Contribute money to charity? Right. But can we all run to Vietnam? If so, what would we do? Kill more people, right? Sure. Kill people to make it a better world. And of course, that was a very popular sentiment in 1968. Batman and Robin do what we want to do. The two fighters fight without killing. The lawbreakers are more often than not punished. Will this save the world? Of course not. My point is that we get a small satisfaction by living in Batman's world each month. For a little while, the readers that desire it can feel the evil being crushed. It is not all fantasy. That is the beauty of it. There really are crooks, spies, and cruel, warped people. Batman's plots are quite possible, except for maybe the one we just read. Why not? What if all the brains I knew from school had also been the brawn I also knew? I really like the way this is written, by the way. What if they had built a custom-made car? What if this brilliant person had devoted all his talents to one subject, criminology. To find a very high crime area, will New York do? Okay. Now let the police appreciate his aid, and we have the makings of a real Batman. I am just backing up the probability of this concept, which everyone scorns. Maybe a real Batman, and remember, this is before we have so much deconstruction and so many stories about what superheroes would be like in the real world. Maybe a real Batman would not wear his costume. Maybe not one crook would dress like some of Batman's foes. Maybe a real Batman would not have a young adolescent with him. But what would Batman be without his costume? Just as admirable, but not as sexy. Some criminals dress flashy, and most crooks are mentally ill, so weird clothes can be accepted. And I say this with a very firm statement: Batman without Robin, forget it, I get no kicks. I personally do not feel that way, but moving on. In regard to the duo's, quote, uniform, as quoted in number 199, if I were to fight crime, dream, I would most certainly try to look my snazziest, and black tights or gray or flesh are much more comfortable than slacks anyway. I think we're getting a little bit into the weeds here. But then concludes with, I suppose this letter is too long to be printed and probably not worth your time either, but I wanted to let someone know that Batman and Robin are the best escapism on the market today and that I will always be a fan. Alice Herman, Richmond Hill, New York. And then the editor writes, and I don't know who the editor is here, by the way, but the editor writes, a lengthy letter that affords such sheer enjoyment, especially to ye editor, definitely demands the time and space for this fan's entire message. Incidentally, I agree. Incidentally, we must confess it was with quite a jolt that we came upon the female signature at the letter's end. And that, I don't think, is the editor saying, oh, a gasp, shock, and awe, we have women reading our books. Isn't that crazy? It's that I think the editor was probably surprised that those sentiments were being written by a female writer, because so many guys at the time, and even when I was growing up to some degree, were kind of put in a box by society, put in the kind of nerd category, and it was mostly guys complaining that or never mentioning it, but feeling bad that they have this hobby that they love that they can't share with anybody because you get labeled and you look like, a child that never grew up, and you feel like people don't understand you. And we had this with comics, and we had this with Star Trek fans, and, all kinds of stuff, comic science fiction and other things. Girls, whole other category. You just didn't even expect, a lot of society didn't even expect that girls were reading comics. So in letters pages, I mean, even in the same book, there are other letters written by girls, but to come out and make some of these points, not only about why Batman is worth reading and to an adult going to college, but also why it's simultaneously escapist entertainment, but why it's not as far-fetched as relatively as people might pretend like it was. I can see why the editor might have been surprised that was coming from a female perspective in 1968. Really interesting, well-written letter, a little bit meandery, certainly, but I wanted to read it to you because I was somewhat taken aback by it myself, and it was just neat seeing that kind of comic book kind of apologist perspective in a book from this period. Anyway, everybody, thanks as always for watching. Sure appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you again hopefully tomorrow with another one. I've got a lot going on this week, and I'm a little bit behind. Hopefully I don't have to play too much more catch up, but just bear with me as I am trying to get back to the regular day count with this. And in the meantime, I was Captain Logan, and happy reading.